Lakes are bodies of water not connected to the ocean. Most contain fresh water, which makes them a focus for life, as all land-based animals require fresh water to survive. Only 1/3 of 1% of the Earth's fresh water exists as surface water. Just 3% of the world's water is fresh, with 2/3 being locked away in polar or glacial ice, and most of the rest in underground aquifers. 2 lake systems, North America's Great Lakes and Russia's Lake Baikal, account for more than 50% of the Earth's fresh surface water. Recently, a Russian expedition attempted to send a mini-submarine to the bottom of Lake Baikal. Formed in an ancient rift valley, Lake Baikal is the deepest body of fresh water in the world, and it holds a greater volume of water than any other lake. Organised by the Metropole Group in collaboration with the P.P. Shersov Institute, 2 submersibles, Mir 1 and Mir 2, were sent down to collect samples of the bedrock at the floor of the lake. The P.P. Shersov Institute is part of the Russian Academy of Sciences. It has a fleet of research submersibles designed to function at extreme depths. The Mir craft used for the Baikal dive are capable of descending to 2,000 metres. This was the first time it had been used in fresh water. The dive lasted almost 5 hours. In a symbolic gesture, the expeditioners drank a sample of water collected from the bottom, a depth of 1,637 metres. Lake Baikal is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. During the winter months, the lake freezes over. With an average ice thickness of 1 metre, the surface becomes a highway. The Trans-Siberian Railway passes along the edge of the lake. Completed in 1914, the railway was intended to open up Russia's vast eastern region, but the area is still relatively undeveloped. Situated near the border of Russian Siberia and Mongolia, the Lake Baikal region is home to more than 1,700 species of plants and animals, most of which are unique to the area. But the region is undergoing changes due to a warming climate. Vast expanses of soil that has been frozen for tens of thousands of years has started to thaw. Huge ice wedges have been exposed by the thawing process. The wedges are normally covered by vegetation, but as the ice melts, the solid land around it turns into mud and subsides, causing trees to fall over and exposing more ice. The thaw is just part of what could be a much greater problem. The frozen soil is known as permafrost. As it melts, it releases methane, a greenhouse gas that in this case has been trapped in the frozen soil for 20,000 years. The process will accelerate the rate of global warming. Sergei Simov has studied the Siberian permafrost for over 25 years. He says the melting of the permafrost exposes ancient soil formed during the last ice age, when large herbivores like mammoth and bison roamed Siberia. The thaw creates an ever-growing number of lakes, where methane bubbles up to the surface. Where the natural vegetation of mosses, shrubs and trees has been disturbed, the thaw is faster and causes land subsidence. Zimov's research team is trying to find out just how fast this matter is melting. They measure the release of the gases at a test site in the coniferous swamps. To induce the thaw of permafrost, they've removed the vegetation that normally works as thermal insulation. Ancient organic matter is frozen beneath 1 million square kilometres of Siberia. It is this ancient compost that is now melting, releasing methane and CO2. Humanity emits about 7 billion tonnes of carbon a year. Zimov says permafrost areas hold 500 billion tonnes of carbon, which, if it melts, can release methane and carbon dioxide with frightening speed. The methane released as the swampy new lakes continue to grow is 20 times more insulating than CO2, making it a very potent greenhouse agent. In just 10 years, a main road to a gold mine in the neighbouring region of Chukotka has subsided into an impassable, bumpy canyon up to 7 metres deep in some places. This was the region's main road. Every day, huge trucks brought cargo over this road, but as the permafrost melted, the road sank, becoming a ravine. The same thing is happening to other roads built above permafrost. Chersky is a depressed town with a population of around 3,000. Here, many houses have been demolished or abandoned by tenants after their concrete walls cracked as the ancient ice under their foundations melted. The people of this sparsely populated region depend on fishing for their survival, but the thaw is also affecting the fish stocks. Rivers become swollen when the weather warms, sometimes bursting their banks and flooding. This is increasing the number and size of the lakes across the region, but it interferes with the breeding cycles of the fish, and numbers are declining. Another lake in northwestern Italy had the residents of the village of Macugnaga worried when it too was expanding. Lake Ephemeral is fed by meltwater from the Belvedere Glacier in Italy's Piedmont region, and usually causes no problems. But after Europe's record-breaking heat wave of 2002, runoff from the glacier had increased dramatically, and civil defence authorities were using helicopters and 6 pumps to keep the water level under control. The possibility that it could burst, sending 3 million cubic metres of water cascading into Macugnaga, was very real. During 3 weeks, the lake's level had risen by a metre a day, before a drop in temperatures slowed the rate of melting, giving more time for experts to find a solution. A sonar system was put in place to monitor water levels in Lake Ephemeral around the clock. Occasional bad weather slowed emergency operations, already hampered by the lake's location, 2,300 metres above sea level. The pumping operation proved effective, but the Belvedere Glacier remains diminished. Australia remains in the grip of its worst drought in 100 years, and it might be too much for these greenshanks and other migratory birds dependent on the country's wetlands. The Coorong is a sanctuary to more than 240 species of birds. Some fly in from as far as Siberia, Japan and China. Trawling the South Lagoon, researchers David Short and Neil Wellman have found only 1 species of fish. In past years, a sweep with a net would yield hundreds. In 1985, the area was designated a wetland of international importance, but now the Coorong is facing an ecological disaster, brought on by drought and mismanagement of the Murray River system. The fresh water, which once flowed into the lakes, has stopped. Its fragile ecology depends on getting a mix of fresh water from the Murray River and seawater from the ocean. But drought and over-allocation of water by the government has so reduced the Murray River's flow, sections of the lakes are now salty puddles. The receding level of the Murray River's lower lakes has forced everyone living in the district to seek alternative water services, and this year scientists recorded their lowest tallies ever of migratory birds. Reed beds, which provide food and nesting sites for birds, are disappearing, and native fish are dying out. In some parts of the lake system, salinity levels are 8 times that of the ocean. An emergency scheme has been implemented to pump the concentrated brine out to the ocean in the hope that it will be replaced by freshwater inflows. Not long ago, there were 120 dairy farmers in the area. Today, only a handful remain, and they need rain badly. Australia could become the first country to fail the UN Ramsar Convention to protect an internationally significant wetland. Lake Balaton, Central Europe's biggest freshwater lake and one of Hungary's main tourist attractions, is shrinking, prompting warnings of ecological and economic catastrophe. For the first time since records began in 1865, 4 consecutive hot summers and low annual rainfall sucked millions of litres of water from Lake Balaton, exposing large mudflats and forcing holidaymakers to walk far out into the lake before the water was deep enough to allow swimming. Scientists blame the falling water levels on global warming and warn that such rapid climate change could devastate Balaton's tourism-dependent economy in the decades to come. Balaton, 160 kilometres south of the capital Budapest, covers some 600 square kilometres and is known as the Hungarian Sea or the nation's playground. With its warm, shallow waters, picturesque villages, thermal spas and sloping vineyards, the lake attracts several million tourists each year and accounts for over 5% of Hungary's gross domestic product. Once a summer retreat for the elite of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Balaton later became a favoured meeting point for East Germans during the decades of communism when international travel was restricted. When it became clear that less water was reaching the lake and more was being lost through evaporation, the Hungarian government began to worry, and a plan to transfer water from the Raba River was examined. Long jetties and water slides that used to stretch from shoreside gardens into the lake now stand exposed, ending well short of the water. The government is reluctant to take hasty and costly decisions until the scientists have more data. Below the volcanic hills of Djibouti, in the Horn of Africa, lies Lake Assal, Africa's lowest point, at 150 metres below sea level. There's more to this lake than the stunning landscape. It's the site of the ancient nomadic tradition of salt digging. Ahmed Tour makes his living mining salt, as his ancestors have done for centuries. He left home with his 2 camels 5 days ago, and it'll take him a day scooping salt out of the lake with his bare hands until his sacks are full. Then he'll journey to neighbouring Ethiopia to sell the salt to merchants or barter it for food. It's a harsh life, but he can feed his family. But not far from Ahmed's camels, the face of Lake Assal is changing. Mohammed Adayas used to collect salt by hand too, but now he works for a salt mining company, earning $900 a month, a fortune in Djibouti. From 1997, salt mining at Lake Assal became industrial, and now several companies are using machines to dig the lake's salt. Salt is becoming one of Djibouti's biggest export industries, thanks in part to the border war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Landlocked Ethiopia no longer has access to Eritrean ports, so Djibouti stepped in and filled the gap, supplying the salt that Ethiopia could no longer easily import by sea. Concerns like the Ethiopian tanning industry use the salt to cure hides and skins. And for as long as tensions between Ethiopia and Eritrea persist, Djibouti's salt industry will continue to thrive. The salt on Lake Assal is replenished annually by salt water seeping in from the Red Sea, making it an abundantly renewable resource. For the time being, the traditional salt gathering coexists with the modern industry. Small-scale merchants will still buy from nomads like Ahmed. But with the lure of easier money to be made in the big industries, Ahmed's may just be the last generation of Afar nomads to carry on a tradition that has survived for centuries. Every year, hundreds of thousands of Hindu devotees, cattle traders and foreign tourists converge on the sand dunes surrounding Pushkar Lake in India's Rajasthan to participate in one of the world's most colourful festivals. Tens of thousands of Hindu pilgrims come to bathe in the holy waters of Pushkar Lake. The Pushkar Fair, which takes place in the desert 375 kilometres west of India's capital, is a mix of three diverse attractions: an annual cattle fair, a Hindu religious festival, and a tourist attraction. At the time of the full moon around October and November, in the Hindu month of Kartik, the small town on the edge of the desert lake swells with nomadic tribespeople, craftsmen, artisans, musicians, and tourists. Camel breeders camp out in the surrounding sands for a week of serious camel trading, and camera-carrying tourists settle in for some serious photography. Across Asia and the Middle East, camels still occupy an important position in rural economies. For travel in arid regions that lack well-made roads, camels are essential. The animals are also sources of meat and milk. Around 25,000 camels will change hands at the Pushkar Lake Camel Fair. The animals also have a part to play in the tourist industry. The festival attracts thousands of tourists, with many keen for a camel ride. Nap Hai Lake, high in the Tibetan Plateau, is an important breeding area for the declining numbers of black-necked cranes. The region is sparsely populated by Chinese standards, but expanding farmlands are leading to the draining of swamps and wetlands, the habitat of an array of bird life, including the black-necked crane. The Nap Hai wetlands, where black-necked cranes feed and breed, are under tremendous pressure, as their fragile wetland habitat is facing increasing pollution and shrinking freshwater sources. Black-necked cranes are also being threatened by uncontrolled poaching. The bird's plumage is in high demand. A symbol of peace, the black-necked cranes were once abundant in Western China, Bhutan, and India. Now, the species is regarded as endangered. Fragmentation of the wetlands, combined with a booming tourist industry, is adding to the pressure on the bird's natural habitat, and ornithologists are trying to learn more about the bird's habits. It is estimated that there are only 5,000 to 6,000 cranes left in the wild. The wetlands of Bhutan and southern Tibet are the wintering sites for these birds, while northern Yunnan and the eastern part of Ladakh in India serve as their breeding grounds. Surrounded by snow-capped mountains, alpine meadows, and mountain forests, the area is also home to other endangered species, such as the snub-nosed monkey and the snow leopard. With elevations between 1,500 and 5,400 metres, the region has extremely diverse climate, soil, and vegetation patterns, with high-altitude marshes, lakes, and wetlands where the cranes like to congregate. Over the last few decades, China's rapidly growing economy and population have been the root causes of wetland and vegetation degradation throughout the country. Planned dams, roads, and tourism infrastructure are all potential threats. Every February at Lake St. Moritz, high in the Swiss Alps, a unique racing season takes place. The St. Moritz White Turf races have been held every year since 1907 on the frozen surface of the resort town's lake. Thoroughbred horses from around the world compete in races including flat course sprints, trotting, and skiing, in which skiers are pulled by horses. The skiing takes place on a 2,700-metre circuit. This particular racing style has its origins in Scandinavia, where the skiers are pulled by reindeer. The racing, which takes place over 3 consecutive Sundays, draws a crowd of around 10,000 people. The winner of the skiing event was Harald Kronseder, pulled by Akebono. There's also an ice trotting event, where the horses are harnessed to aluminium sleds. For traction, the horses wear specially spiked shoes. The surface upon which they race is snow lying on ice almost 1 metre thick. When When the event started in 1907, white turf featured one 5,000-metre race with jockeys sitting in Norwegian sleds. The modern series of events has a greater emphasis on safety, with coloured skis mandatory so the horses can easily see them. In 1967, at Coniston Water in Britain's Lake District, a technical team gathered around a unique craft called Bluebird. The speedboat, piloted by Sir Donald Campbell, was set to break the world water speed record of 442 kilometres per hour. The jet-powered Bluebird had already completed its first run at a speed of 475 kilometres per hour. To set a formally recognised record, it had to complete a second run in the opposite direction, but the lake's surface was still choppy after the first run. At more than 480 kilometres per hour, tragedy struck. After the crash, Campbell's body was not found. Bluebird was thought to have hit a wave generated during the first run, and the rescue team were only able to locate small pieces of the craft. Almost 4 decades after the tragedy, a salvage team located Bluebird, and it was agreed that it should be raised to protect it from looters. The wreck lay under 50 metres of water, and divers needed to attach winch cables so it could be lifted safely to the surface. No long-term plans had been made for the craft. It would be thoroughly dried, sprayed with inhibiting wax to keep out oxygen, wrapped and put away in polythene until a permanent home could be organised. Some hope more extensive restoration work will be carried out. Campbell's widow, Tonya Byrne Campbell, was at the lake when the craft was raised. Some had wanted it left where it was. Donald Campbell remains the only person to have held both the land and water world speed records. Ironically, the fatal record attempt was an effort to break his own record. In 1967, the Bluebird K7 was already more than 10 years old, but it had just been refitted with a new, more powerful jet. Campbell wanted to push the record beyond the reach of a newly arrived American challenger, but the 1967 record attempt was plagued by technical problems and poor weather conditions. The salvage team was led by diver Bill Smith. He said he was glad that they had reached the boat, as there was always the risk that less scrupulous souvenir hunters could get there first. Smith said it was important that the operation was carried out with dignity and respect. Campbell's body was finally located and recovered. He was laid to rest in the churchyard at Coniston on the 12th of September 2001.